Director General of a cousin think tank down the road called Royal United Services Institute. And it's really a pleasure to co-host this event with Chatham House, with Alex Mines. Where is Alex? Aha, there he is in the front row, yes. But it's been a pleasure to work on this together. I think Greg Mills, who's the president of the Brunchers Foundation, is affiliated with both our institutions, so we thought it better to do it together. To chair this distinguished panel of experts to talk about democracy in Africa and how to fortify and strengthen democracy beyond elections. As we all know, it's much more than elections. It's a rule of law, it's strengthening civil society, transparency, it's power sharing, it's many different institutions and pillars of government that need to be strengthened. And in fact, I think many of the lessons from this really excellent book could easily be applied to many parts of Europe and the United States right now. So we're looking forward to taking you on the road further afield when you're ready. I think it's also very interesting right now as we seem to be entering another period of great power competition between the US and China offering an alternative vision of governance at the same time that the US has really withdrawn somewhat from its traditional role of promoting these types of values on the global stage. So we're at a very interesting time, and that's why it'll be really exciting to hear from the speakers today their thoughts on all of these issues. Before I introduce the three speakers and our discussant, I have a bit of housekeeping to do, if that's all right. Can you all make sure your phones are on silent? We're happy for you to leave them on and for you to tweet, but just make sure they don't ring, please. This meeting is fully on the record, so it's not Chatham House rules. The entire thing will be on the record, including the Q&A. And we would also ask that you do not film this presentation without the permission of the organizers. But you are, of course, welcome to tweet with the hashtag at Chatham House Africa, CH Africa. So let me now introduce our very distinguished panel that we will be hearing from. First, we will hear from Dr. Greg Mills, who directs the Johannesburg-based Brunchers Foundation. Previously, he was the National Director of the South African Institute of International Affairs between 1996 and 2005. He is a very prolific author and presenter, and critically, he's on the advisory board of the Royal United Services Institute. But he will be followed by His Excellency President Obasanjo, the former President of Nigeria. I think he is a man that probably needs no introduction to this audience, but he has certainly had a distinguished military career as well as civilian career. He has also, unfortunately for his pro-democracy views, served time in prison, and but has really emerged as an international statesman, and he travels the globe and really works on many issues that all of us care about: democracy and governance, human rights, etc. And then finally, we will hear from Tendai Biti, who is a Zimbabwean politician. And in fact, the last time I had seen him was right before the elections, and then he was subsequently arrested, so it was good to see you out again, Tendai. He was the Zimbabwean Minister of Finance from 2009 to 2013. And he's currently the Deputy National Chairperson of the MDC and a Member of Parliament for Harare East, as well as Chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee. After that, we will hear from Professor Carlos Lopes, who will be the discussant. He's going to respond to the three panelists. He's a professor in the Graduate School of Development Policy and Practice at the University of Cape Town. He's also a visiting professor at Sciences Po in Paris and an associate fellow in the Africa program here at Chatham House, as well as being a prolific author and commentator. So each speaker will take about 10 minutes, and then Carlos, you'll have between 5 and 10 minutes, and then we should have plenty of time for Q&A. So Greg, over to you.
Thank you very much, Karin. It's a great pleasure to be back here at Chatham House. I was at the turbulent President's address yesterday. We'll try and be more positive than he was about his own country. And I'm glad to see we didn't have the same degree of resistance to entering and exiting the building as the protesters yesterday demonstrated. But it's very good to see that African debates are alive and well in London and at such a level. And thank you very much, Karin, for those words of introduction, and especially to you and Alex for the collaboration that has enabled this event to occur. Before I start, and I'm going to be brief, I'm like the supporting bongo drum artist or guitarist before the main band in President Obasanjo and Tendai. So I'm a good player here. Before we start, however, I want to acknowledge the presence of Ambassador Lakhdar Brahimi and for the tremendous role you've played, sir, in so many debates in Africa and internationally. To Bishop Precious Amuku, who's hiding at the back there, who's a trusted friend and wise counsel to me personally, but also to many of us here. To Alan Doss, I'm not sure where you are, Alan. You over there? Of course, has a distinguished career as SRSG, but also in which the foundation engaged with you extensively when in Liberia and subsequently in the Congo, but also, of course, in your current role in the Kofi Annan Foundation, and then my friend and colleague to my left, geographically, Carlos Lopes, who, of course, needs no further introduction. So the last time I was here was 2 years ago with President Obasanjo and my colleague Dickie Davis, introducing a book called Making Africa Work, which, like this one, is published by Hearst. And what that book essentially posited was that there was a need to end business as usual in Africa. And the reason for this wasn't because we woke up one morning and said we should end business as usual, it's a good thing to do, but simply because of the massive demographic challenges which were occurring in the continent. The doubling of the continent's population over the next generation demanded a change in the way in which we did things, and Making Africa Work essentially dealt with some of the economic policy choices behind, in terms of managing this transition and turning this demographic change into a dividend. The second chapter of that book came about as a result of a review process that we ran before we published anything at the foundation. We ran a review process, and the second chapter in that book really looked at the relationship between democracy and development. It disaggregated 25 years of African economic experience and looked to tell whether, in fact, democracies did better at the development game in Africa than the alternative, given that there appear to be a threat to democracies in terms of the then prevailing authoritarian, benign dictator, authoritarian democrat argument that you heard so much in Africa. And the empirical evidence showed then, as indeed it does in this book, is that democracy is better equipped to deal with and address the development challenges that Africa faces than any other system, because of many reasons. It allows for peaceful change of leadership. We show in the book how the relationship between conditions of governance and the rule of law is better the better the democracy. And of course this all relates to checks and balances, the nature of the government system itself, respect for human rights and values, but not least the fact that you have turnover in government, and that leads to a competition of ideas, which really lies at the heart of some of the reasons why democracies are better. Democracy, we argue in this book, does not guarantee success, but in the African context at least, it's much more likely to deliver it. And we use Freedom House's classification system between free, partly free, and unfree, because it's been around a long time. There are other systems, they're pretty similar, but Freedom House has the advantage of continuity in this regard. And what you see in Africa is a tremendous shift between the 1980s and the 1990s in particular, from mostly unfree or partly free systems of government to a situation that you have some consolidation around the numbers today, which is 10 free countries as adjudged by Freedom House and 22 each in the not free and partly free categories. There appears to be pretty much stasis, or some would term it paralysis, in terms of movement between these different categories as a result of several things occurring, which we go into in the book. We also show that democracy is not linked, at least in the African case, to a particular stage of development. Most countries that shift to greater freedoms are pretty poor. The general rule of thumb in the international community is you need to be somewhere between $35,000 per capita to be able to consider a stage of moving towards better representation and rights. That, in other words, that's the you have to be richer to be freer type argument. But in fact, in Africa, most countries have moved to free. The free status are still poor. It's generally also not an elite pact. This is not something that elites wake up on one morning and decide that they want to give up. But in fact, most of the transitions occur because they are bottom up. And of course, we posit that this is going to be a shock to some countries engaging with Africa who believe that elite pacts in terms of doing business are enough to guarantee the safety of their investments. We spend a lot of time talking about authoritarianism. Now, of course, there are those that will say that authoritarianism is delivered in Asia. Why shouldn't it deliver in Africa? Well, in fact, greater militarization or authoritarianism in Africa has generally led to very poor development performance, whatever the record in other regions. We spend some time, and this book is based on more than 300 interviews, so you can imagine the sheer sweat behind that and the logistics involved in it. But we spend some time investigating the Ethiopian case, and we show, in terms of the words of various politicians there, not least Haile Mariam and Prime Minister Abiy, that authoritarianism has indeed not proven enough, despite the prevailing orthodoxy until the shift of government from Haile Mariam to Abiy, that in fact it was a shining example of how a benign dictatorship could work. This system has failed to address sufficiently the internal contradictions that exist in Ethiopia, including that of political exclusion, and has had an economic cost as well, not least in terms of the isolation from international markets. Rwanda, we would argue, because that's often thrown back at us, so I might as well address with it up front, but this is a particularly special case, given the extraordinary history that that country has had. And there's a real risk that if you try and get another Paul Kagame, that in fact you won't get one, that you'll get just another old-style authoritarian. So there's a combination of good luck, perhaps, if you regard Kagame as being a good leader in the African pantheon, but there's also a special set of circumstances producing that. And then two last comments before I hand over to the main band. The first of these is about elections. Now, there's a lot of focus on elections today. A big chunk of the book looks at various elections, creates something of a typology in terms of the way in which international monitoring missions, which President Obasanjo served on a good number, operate. And clearly, it's an important prerequisite for any democratic system, but it's not the only part. It's not, democracy is not just in terms of what happens on the day of an election. In fact, an election itself is not just about what happens on the day. Only an idiot would rig an election on election day. Now, as you've seen from the recent election in Malawi, and the extensive volumes of Tipex that were used on all the voter return forms, clearly there are a few idiots out there, I posit. But generally this sort of gerrymandering and fiddling happens a long time in advance. It's about voters' rolls, it's about fake news, it's about shaping the environment, it's about dividing and ruling, and all sorts of other techniques. The digital technology is important in this, but it clearly has its limits. It's very important, however, for those who support democracies to develop a playbook as to how they should do so, as well as those democrats within those societies. And it'll be interesting to hear from Tendai in particular as to how one confronts an authoritarian system with a democratic playbook of your own. And then the final comment I'd make is really about the role of external actors. We spend a chapter looking at the role of external actors. There's a lot of money, of course, given to Africa by foreign taxpayers. Much of it's not for democracy. In fact, a very small percentage is for democracy, despite evidence that this aid perhaps delivers best of all. And democracy aid, as we've seen increasingly, particularly in terms of American aid to the continent, can fall foul of strategic and national interests. So no matter the election result, you're a key actor, we'll turn a blind eye and keep on marching. There's need for focus, particularly in this regard, increasing focus on what African actors do. In the book, we look at the examples of Gambia, where there was a considered regional response to what happened as a result of that election, compared to Zimbabwe. The AU in particular has a set of responsibilities in this regard, but has had, I think to be fair, patchy performance. Particularly important is the role of the lead actor in this context. And although it's important for donors overall to recognize the negative impact of aid at times in reinforcing authoritarianism. So with those few brief comments, I hope I've enticed you to go off and buy a copy so President Obasanjo can enjoy a splendid retirement and doesn't have to write more books. But seriously, I hope that it will stimulate some debate in addition to that, those issues which follow what I have to say. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Greg. I choose to come to the podium and to stand up because I'm not as tall as Greg. If I sit down, you probably won't see my head. I want to join Greg in welcoming all of you, and particularly the four friends and distinguished guests whom he has specially named, but all of you are very much welcome. As Greg correctly pointed out, this book, Democracy Works, is the other side of the book we launched 2 years ago. We call Making Africa Work. That's essentially of the economy. What we need to do, and if we fail to do them, what could be the consequences. Then after we have written that book and we've launched it, including launching it here, we came to the conclusion that we cannot talk of economy without talking on politics. And so we decided to venture into writing this second book, which they have to go together, because good politics leads to good economy, and bad politics, of course, and that is really essentially what we are saying in this book. Democracy we are talking about is politics and governance, in other words. But the essence of governance is development. And what is development about? The welfare and the well-being of every member of the society. All inclusive community, shared society. None is left out. Now, how do we then get or manage our politics, governance, to achieve this essential thing for all of us within the society, which is good, the well-being, and the welfare of every member of the society. And that is what we are saying in this book, Democracy Works. Is there alternative to achieve development the way it should be achieved in Africa? Is there alternative to democracy? And whatever we may feel about democracy, we do not say it's a panacea, that it will do it, but we come to the conclusion when we look at what we have on the ground, and the empirical evidence that we have no other form of government that will deal with the situation that we have in Africa, other than democracy. Now, we look at what I call 5 P's. Politics, which is master. And if politics is master, it has to lead in dealing with the other 4 P's. Population, demography, which can be an asset or a liability. And we must tell ourselves the truth. The reality of today is that we are not doing enough in dealing with the issue of demography to make it an asset. By the year 2050, the population of Africa will be more than 2 billion. My own country, Nigeria, which was only 45 million at independence in 1960, is today over 200 million. And by the year 250, we will be over 400 million. Today, we have over 13 million children that should be in school, but are not in school. That is a problem. If we are not solving that, we are not able to solve even the simple issue of education for our children. I wonder. So, politics has to deal with the issue of demography, population. We have no other way of dealing with it, except that our governance, we will run our politics, is able to give every child education, skill, empowerment, for him and her to be able to make meaningful contribution, to live a worthwhile life, and for him or her to be able to make contribution to his family, his community, his nation, his continent, and to the world at large. Then prosperity, which is really the making everybody to be sufficiently well-to-do to live a worthwhile life, elimination of poverty, creation of wealth. It is only the way we manage politics that will make that possible. Then protection, security. There is actually no is a problem in my own country, Nigeria. In the northwest, we have Ubara. In the south, the Delta area, we have militants. In the northwest and coming to southwest, we now have a new phenomenon, kidnapping. They call it banditry. And it's organized crime of people in the bush, in the forest, who dominate the forest and come out and kidnap and ask for ransom. I understand they are not coordinated yet, but if they become coordinated, they will be worse than Boko Haram. And if they become coordinated with ISIS being dislodged from Iraq and Syria, their point of entry in Africa will be Mali, and they are already coming in. They will consolidate, they will take over Boko Haram and whatever else you have, and all countries, I said this the other day, all countries north of River Congo will be untenable. They will be dominated in a matter of months, maybe months, a couple of years. Then the fifth B is partnership. We have to work together, partnership. At the community level, at the local level, at the national level, and within Africa. And Africa has to work in partnership with the rest of the world. Otherwise, we will not get it. Now, this is what this book is all about. And as Greg has said, many interviews, some of us have brought our experiences to bear in the book. And we have looked at what is happening, and authoritarianism, we believe, is not the way to go. And the reason is simple. Democracy deals better with diversity than any other form of government, because democracy allows for discourse, dialogue, getting people together, debate, and reaching a consensus. Yes, it takes time, but it is time that is worthwhile. Now, when I talk to people, particularly the young ones in Nigeria, and they are putting emphasis on democracy, and they retort and say to you, okay, say now democracy mankucho. Which means simply, is it democracy that I will need? Tell me what I will need. So if democracy cannot deliver, democracy will be in danger. So democracy must be able to deliver. And it's when democracy delivers, all will be well. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
very much, Alex. I can't see Alex for inviting us back to this auspicious background. We've been here before. I think this is my third time to be here. I was here last May when I came with President Nelson Chamisa, and before then I'd been here several times when I served in the Government of National Unity as Minister of Finance. So it's a privilege to be here with so many Zimbabweans in the audience. It's ironic that as Zimbabweans we are having a discussion on democracy here in London, a discussion that we can't have back at home without the CIO and state security agents harassing us. In fact, I was saying to some people outside that this is our 12th launch of the book. We had about 6-7 launches in South Africa. We went to Malawi, but it was only in Zimbabwe that we launched our book without the actual book, because the security agents took our book at the But why democracy? We write this book because democracy has become a contested narrative. Inroads have been made into the understanding of democracy that we grew up with and that we understood to be. Terrorism has made an infraction into the concept of democracy as we know it. And this terrorism is very sophisticated. It has shifted attention from state-to-state conflict into private bandit groups. Papa spoke of Boko Haram, Al-Shabaab, ISIS, and others. So it has redefined the landscape and theory of democracy as we have known it for years. Populism too has revisited and redefined the concept of democracy as we know it. And the twin cousin of populism is nationalism. States and elites have become inward-looking, and the nation state is on the rise. And in Africa, the nation state is a tragedy, because the nation state is just a motley of little tribes that are amalgamating and profiling an agenda which on the face of it sounds national, but stripped of any decency. It's really an agenda of patronage and looting and grandstanding the state. Here in the United Kingdom, we see the manifestations of nationalism in the context and concept of Brexit. I was saying to my British friends that welcome to Africa. What we have been witnessing is what we've been living with for decades and decades. Another challenge to democracy is the concept of performance legitimacy. So you don't derive your legitimacy as a leader from the consent of the people. You derive your legitimacy as a leader from performance legitimacy defined in terms of huge roads that are built by Chinese capital, huge dams, huge bridges. So you find on the African continent countries that are nominally doing extremely and exceptionally well, but without a democratic content into it. For example, Rwanda. For example, Ethiopia under Meles Zenawi. Egypt under President Sisi. Some would say Libya, and Libya is a contradiction, because many are actually arguing that Libya was doing well under the dictator Muammar Gaddafi, and not now. So in writing this book, we had to speak to all those issues and to restate the supremacy and sacrosanctity of democracy. We define democracy in the broad terms, bigger than and much more comprehensive than an election that comes once in 5 years. And being a Zimbabwean, I know a lot about elections. Since independence in 1980, we've had 33 elections. That is an average of an election every 4 years, but those elections have not delivered because of dictatorship, autocracy, and electoral authoritarianism. We define democracy to mean an inclusive economy, inclusive growth, and the development national state that carries everyone on board. We continue the arguments that we make in the book, Making Africa Work, by saying that you can have a robust economy, but you need a solid, sustainable democracy that includes everyone else. And three things are dear to us in making the case for democracy. The first one is that governance has to be governance reflecting the consent of the public, reflecting the social contract. Those that govern must have the will of those that are governed. And in Zimbabwe, that has been the disjuncture, that for 39 years, for 40 years, we've been run by a group of men and women that we've had no relation to. We've been run by a group of men and women that have basically captured state power and used it for personal aggrandizement and the reproduction of the regime survival agenda and the power and retention agenda. We also place a great deal of thought on the capacity of genuine democracies to self-correct. But the self-correcting component of democracy only comes in when there's a genuine electoral delivery system that actually delivers. So in many countries in the world, there's a self-regulation because you know that after 5 years, you are going to be held to account by an electorate. Make comparisons in performance between those countries that can be described as free. Countries like Senegal, countries like Mauritius, countries like Botswana, how well they've been doing fantastically because not just of regular elections, but also open markets and functional economies. So the self-correcting element is very key. But we go beyond the subject of elections. We make the point that it's what happens in between the elections that is so critical. Number one is the existence of constitutions, but not just constitutions, constitutionalism and the rule of law. Oftentimes in Africa, and all of us have got beautiful constitutions. If you go to Uganda, there's a wonderful constitution in the Republic of Uganda, Malawi too, Kenya too, Zimbabwe too. But the challenge is not the existence of a constitution. The challenge is the existence of constitutionalism without, the existence of constitutions without constitutionalism. We pay great respect to South Africa, where a strong judiciary has been a bulwark against the excesses of nationalism, including the vagaries of state capture. Number two is strong functional institutions. It is so key to have democracy in a democracy, sustainable democracy, founded and anchored on strong institutions. Strong institutions include a strong civic society, strong churches, strong business associations, a strong judiciary. Ultimately, in the long term, the biggest guarantor of our democracies are these strong and functional institutions. Number three is a vibrant civic society that is capable of holding to account the ruling elite and the executive. And in South Africa, when we launched the book, it's the kind of society where there is a demonstration every day in South Africa. And you join a demonstration and then you ask, but why are we demonstrating? It's very to the rule of law and to the democracy. I come from a country called Zimbabwe. In November 2017, with the military coup that removed the SO president, Comrade Robert Mugabe, as we call him back at home. The expectation then was that after the coup, there would really be genuine change in Zimbabwe. Regrettably, an opportunity was missed in November of 2017. The hope and expectation of everyone was that the military that took over would bring in a transitional government that included Morgan Tsvangirai and other Democrats to actually offer Zimbabwe a chance of reform, to actually offer Zimbabwe a chance of sustainability, to actually offer Zimbabwe a chance of saving itself after 38 years of decline and poverty. Regrettably, that did not happen. We then went on to an election, the election that was held on the 30th of July 2018. Once again, with great expectations for that election, that would be free and fair, and that it would usher in a government created by the genuine consent of the citizen. Regrettably, that did not happen. The election of the 2018 remains contested. The crisis of legitimacy remains at the fore of the crisis in Zimbabwe as I talk to you right now. Fast-track the country 6 months after the election with a huge political crisis, a crisis of legitimacy. With a huge political crisis in respect of which political space is being closed. As I speak to you right now, there are 7 political activists that are languishing in prison. Their crime was to have a democracy meeting in Malta. As I speak to you right now, leaders of civil society, including trade union leaders, are being visited and harassed by state security agents. On the economic front, there's a crisis. We have hyperinflation that is reaching 300%. The last time we had hyperinflation was in 2008, where our hyperinflation was 500 billion %, the second highest in the world after Hungary in 1956. But to have these two crises happening in less than 10 years is a miracle, and indeed a miracle of failure. Previous countries that have gone through this same experience have required wars. In the case of Germany, 2 world wars to get to where Zimbabwe is at the present moment. We are suffering from a serious dislocation of monetary policy. We operate on 4 multiple pricing systems. There's a price of goods when you use the most common form of cash transfer called EcoCash, mobile phone transfer. There's a price for what we call RTGS, the real transfer gross system. The real transfer means real time. In Zimbabwe, it's not real time. There's a price for the US dollar. And speaking of the US dollar has been commodified again. We've tried to de-dollarize, and the net result is that the exchange rate has shot up between 1 to 9 or 1 to 10, meaning that if you want to buy $100, you require at least 200 of our local fiat currencies, fictitious currencies, either the bond notes or the RTGS dollar. These figures do not capture how the average men and women are living in Zimbabwe at the present moment. 79% of our people are living in extreme poverty, surviving on less than US 35 cents a day. We call it tsawona, which literally means accident, an accident of survival. And with the tsawona, you buy 4 leaves of vegetable, you buy a Coke or a little cup of cooking fat, and you buy a plate of wufu or meal, and that's your day. As a result, all the social indices have collapsed. The maternal mortality rates, 96 out of 1,000 women are dying at childbirth. Infant mortality rate, 86 out of 1,000 babies are dying at childbirth. The same applies to our mortality rates. During the crisis years, they've fallen to 34 for men and 30 for women. We are back again in the under 40 range for our mortality figures. So it's a crisis that requires immediate solution. We know, for instance, that there's discord within the state security agents. There's discord inside the state itself. With the coup in November of 2017, President Obasanjo will tell you that in Africa, coups like London buses come in dozens. You wait for 4 hours, and then in the next hour, 4 will come. So there's a real danger of an implosion in the form of another military intervention. There's a real danger in the form of an implosion in that we've got a young population. 70% of Zimbabweans are below the age of 35. They are young, they are educated, they are technically savvy. You find them on Instagram, you find them on Facebook, you you find them on Twitter. Those kids are going to be on the streets unless we're able to provide them with jobs. We have not been growing enough to cater for these children. The Zimbabwean economy needs to create 1 million jobs a year to cater for the population increases. We are not creating jobs, we are in fact destroying jobs. We met Secretary Harriet Bowden in the morning today, and the big message we made to her this morning was that there has to be international pressure for dialogue in Zimbabwe to create a soft landing for Zimbabwe to avoid an implosion. It is in the self-interest of everyone. Those who believe in democracy, those who believe in sustainable markets, those who require investment. We have to create a soft landing for Zimbabweans so that Zimbabwe can join the nation, the community of nations that are moving forward and progressing in the region. I thank you very much.
Professor Lopes, over to you.
Thank you.
Pull it all together.
Yes, I'm going to try. First, by recognizing that we have with us what I call the President of Africa, which is President Obasanjo, because he's involved in so many different activities of the continent. He has been author, co-author, leader, or co-leader of so many initiatives. And even the current AU reform process has his fingerprints all over it, because he was the one who first proposed alternative sources of funding for the African Union. So he has been very present in all Pan-African debates. So I'm not surprised that he's actually also engaging in this front of producing knowledge and making sure that there is structured proposals for Africans to choose. And obviously I'm very happy also to be here with Greg. Greg is a prolific writer, but also someone that is very respected with African leaders because of his insights and his pragmatism in the way he proposes his very vast knowledge. And you heard the firebrand Tendai Biti. I first met him in the 90s when I was living in Zimbabwe, and I've been following his very interesting career that has been motivated from the values that he espouses, that are values of an activist that has been really quite recognized in terms of promoting human rights and promoting democracy. So we have a book that is quite readable, full of insights, full of interesting proposals. It actually gives justice to the doubts that many have about whether democracy is a panacea, a word that was pronounced by President Obasanjo, when they define democracy as a system where there is universal adult suffrage, where voting is free and fair, the outcome of which reflects the people's choice, and there is a set of supporting institutions and freedoms. Democracy is invaluable for the basic freedoms it offers. This is especially important given Africa's record of violence, human insecurity, and state fragility. So as you see, it's a very generic definition, but it's done on purpose, because it is very clear from the book that democracy has to be contextualized. And that's what the book offers. In order to contextualize, it does a bit of a scanning of different, very important debates that are taking place in the continent, including debates relating to elections integrity, a very important issue, because without elections integrity, one of these fundamental dimensions cannot be properly respected and followed. It shows that there is an authoritarian myth, not to deny that there are lots of examples where things have worked, but to demonstrate that they are rather, exceptional. And therefore, one should not put bets into just that particular way of doing business, even if we can point to successful experiments here and there. But the majority of the cases will turn sour. It is also very clear on the debate about whether development or democracy comes first, by saying the obvious, but demonstrating that the obvious is that you need both. You need a democracy that delivers, as both President Obasanjo and Tendai mentioned. It deals with the issue of fragility, And I think it is important because this is a debate I personally don't like, the stigmatization of African countries with some names like fragile states. But that's just my way of disputing that some of the phenomena that sometimes we describe are not confined to Africa, but they are kind of, framed in African terms. There are certainly fragile states that are in existence in other parts of the planet, but they are not referred as such if you were going to take exactly the same dimensions that are normally applied to Africa. But that's not the debate that the book really is trying to cover. So we have a book written by disruptors. This is what these gentlemen are. They are disruptors. They want to basically shake the tree and make sure that we reflect in different ways about what are the real dimensions that matter for Africa in terms of the democratic debate. I would say that representation of democracy is under threat right now. And this has been mentioned. Is under threat for a variety of reasons. If we go into the pillars that constitute a good representation of democracy, apart from the normal conceptual discussion, we'll say that it is a rules-based system, and it is a regulatory complexity arrangement that allows for markets to prosper, to function, to be predictable. All of this relates to institutions. The book covers very well that this is also about making institutions work. You cannot have a proper democracy if you don't have institutions that are well implemented, that are capable, that have the capabilities as defined by Amartya Sen, but beyond those capabilities that are also anchored in the reality and the context of the specific countries. Then you have the values. The values part is obviously a bit more complicated because the values can change from one historical period to another. They can also be more forcefully implemented in some countries rather than others for certain types of values. Like, for instance, Western democracies tend to give a lot of importance to individual rights. Others will challenge that maybe in Africa it's not so. We have other dimensions that also have to be taken into account. And all of this militates in favor of us questioning a bit the indexing of this type of dimensions of democracy, the values part. And that's why, Freedom House that is used, and Greg explained why, is a contested index. We can use others, like for instance, the Ibrahim Governance Index is not about democracy, but it's about governance in a multifaceted way. Is a bit more, I would say, acceptable measurement of how progress is being performed in Africa, particularly in relation to how democracy delivers, the issue of delivery. And then there is the last dimension, which is sovereignty, which is how you relate to the rest. And I think here we have made a lot of progress in terms of representational democracy evolving over time, consolidating the state, the role of the state, all the way from the Westphalian definition of sovereignty that comes from separation, church and state. All of this has landed in Africa after independence with a lot of questionings about identity, about how we deal with the complexity of African societies. And we end up with a big mess that Tendai has mentioned with great detail, which is the mess of how we don't respect diversity. And President Obasanjo also mentioned it. And I think this is very important because if there is one way of defining what would be the best democratic model for Africa, we'd say there is one common thread, and that is respecting diversity. If you don't respect diversity, we are really in trouble. And in a lot of countries, we are more focused on delivering elections than respecting diversity. And the book squarely treats this subject by giving a lot of importance to democracy between elections. And by doing so, it more or less makes the case that the winner takes all attitude has to be upfront, in the discussion. And we need really to deal with it because it undermines institutions, it personalizes the way power is exercised, and that's why we have some forms of authoritarianism that really are not benign. I would say most forms of authoritarianism are not benign. And probably one way that we can summarize this book is on the debate about African agency and how Africans have really to use this as a vehicle, as an element of their transformation. And that the transformation is necessary for a variety of reasons, obviously because we want development, but also because we have to up the ambition with the youth bulge, with the demographic transitions that African countries are living. It's obvious that we cannot do business as usual, and the book is very emphatic about we need to prepare. This is going to be huge, and it's going to be explosive if it is not properly put together. President Kagame would say there is a time for consensus democracy and a time for competitive democracy, because consensus is needed, to formulate sort of a citizenry and a civic pact that then, gives space for different opinions. This is challengeable, and I think it is part of that debate on whether, agency has to be exercised that way. Maybe in a specific context, but we have to have this debate about agency. To summarize, I would say that normally, the way I like to frame this particular challenge and difficulty is to question people whether we need to democratize Africa or Africanize democracy. And this is not to be taken as a provocation, but rather to basically emphasize the need for agency when we pursue a democratic experiment. And this has obviously to take into account all the gains that we have from democracy. I revisit again from the rules-based, the regulatory complexity, the values-based, the sovereignty, all those dimensions that the book covers so well, but also contextualizing the dimensions that are specific to African countries, different from one country to another, different from one region to another, which also the book is very good in doing. So I certainly recommend you to pick up your copy and enjoy the reading. Thank you.
Thank you. To all the speakers for really excellent presentations. We have about 15 minutes for Q&A. So what I'd like to do is take a few questions together, and then I'll turn to the panel. Can we have the microphone? Can I ask you to keep your questions short? We're starting in the front. We have time to take in as many questions, and then the speakers, please take good notes, and I'll turn back to you. So please introduce yourself. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm Adrian Zemati. I'm a youth author. My question is going to answer the brief background. Just because of what all the speakers have said in respect of inclusiveness. So my question is going to center more on that. If you look at taking West Africa, for example, like say, if we narrow it down to Nigeria, you'll find that recently there was a not too young to rule bill that was passed. This is meant to give young people the opportunity to come into politics. And if you look at one of the 5 Ps President Obasanjo mentioned about, which is population, of course, Africa, Nigeria, for instance, they've got that population, a youth population, but we're not, amassing it. We're not amassing it properly, because if you look at the way the laws are made, it's such that young people are only better to be special assistants and all the rest, but they're not better to be presidents. So people are asking, when we young people really have that, opportunity to actually, go into not just develop, but also hold positions that will make that inclusiveness, achievable. Because a situation where you have young people are excluded or alienated from the process, you don't have a representative democracy. That's the kind of democracy that's called divide and rule, which we have inherited. So we need to evolve our own kind of democracy.
Great, thank you very much. The woman right there in the green scarf. Yeah, that's nice. So we're going to try to take as many as we can. There's a lot of questions.
Hi, I'm Christina Lam from the Sunday Times. I've reported a lot from Zimbabwe and DRC and interviewed Tendai many times. And I wanted to really ask about the role of the international community and the African Union, because Tendai was explaining about the situation in Zimbabwe today. But the fact is, as you speak, the EU is in talks with the regime about relaxing sanctions and engaging with them, and their argument is that for helping the people in a terrible economic situation in Zimbabwe, it's better to engage with this regime than to isolate them. So I wanted to know what you thought about that. And on a related thing, I mean, what kind of message has been sent by the failure of the international community and the African Union to do anything about fraudulent elections in Zimbabwe and indeed in DRC?
Okay, thanks, Christina. Right behind you, the gentleman at the top here.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm Robin Gwynn, business consultant. Just say, I'm not sure the panel said much about the growing political influence of China as opposed to economic. Is that something that you're concerned about? And perhaps is there more in the book on that?
Okay, let's go over to Precious, please. Right there. I'm going to take 5 in this round, and we'll go back to the panel.
My question will probably be towards Precious Omoko, Lamed Palace, sorry. So, Tendai, I'm interested in that, the missed opportunities you referred to correct, maybe to get Zimbabwe onto that platform of democracy. What could we have done not to miss those opportunities?
Okay, thank you, Bishop. The woman right here in that colorful dress. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, I don't know people's names. This is the last question for this round, and then we'll go back. Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Violet Gonda. I'm a Zimbabwean journalist, and this is a question for Tendai. I just wanted to find out, is Zimbabwe now a military state with a controlled civilian president? And if so, what can the opposition do realistically, since you've said that the democratic space is shrunk? So what can you do realistically? And also, comparing and contrasting the environment under Mugabe and this so-called new dispensation, is Zimbabwe better off or is it worse off? What can you say? Because many Zimbabweans right now, or some are saying that the situation is worse now and that life under Mugabe was better. Do you agree?
Okay, thank you. Tendai, we'll start with you, and then we'll work our way across the panel to answer the questions. Several were addressed to you.
I think that it's an indictment for the regime that is a matter of fairness. The average ordinary Zimbabwean feels that life was better under President Mugabe. And that's quite an indictment because life was extremely difficult under President Mugabe. We were tortured, we were imprisoned. The economic meltdown of 2008 was under President Mugabe. And under President Mugabe, our country lost value for 11 successive years. 60% of value was lost between 1997 to 2008. So it is an indictment. But if you look at the issue objectively, I think the sentiment of the average person is some objective basis for saying that. If you look at what happened on the 1st of August 2018, where 6 Zimbabweans were shot dead for protesting. If you look at what happened in January of 2019, where 18 Zimbabweans were shot dead, actually not for protesting, but actually for staying home, what we call back at home, stay away. Women were raped, people were beaten up. Talk about things that are measurable, like the rate of inflation, which I've spoken about, the exchange rate, the number of people that are living below the poverty line. What the statistics cannot capture is actually how difficult it is for an average Zimbabwean to carry himself or herself from one day to the next. There is no electricity. There is no water. The roads are full of potholes. With great respect to the Democratic Republic of Congo, where the pothole capital of Africa. There are roadblocks in the streets. You can't get money from a bank. Even if you've got a debit card, you can transfer money from your debit card into EcoCash. So it's just corrosive, you know. So by the time you get to an office or if you get to the street to vend your wares, you've already been weighed down by just this mundane aspect of trying to reproduce yourself. And it is that weight that is not documented. It is that weight you will not find in any IMF report and in any World Bank report. And speaking of the IMF, they've just produced a dangerous, disastrous staff report number 19 of 144, which basically is an attempt to put lipstick on a crocodile, to use the language that we use. A disastrous attempt to chlorinate a regime that is not capable of any level of chlorination, a complete disaster. So if you ask me, yes, we have become a securocratic state violent, but I think there are two things that are arresting Zimbabwe at the present moment. It's number one, the regime survival agenda. It's so clear after the coup of November 2017 that President Mugabe was just a normative representative of the securocracy. And the minute he served and stopped serving the interests of this class, particularly the attempt to make his wife succeed him, they moved in and took over power blatantly. The second thing that is also very clear in Zimbabwe is state capture. The levels within which the interests of cartels have simply conflated with that of the state. There are cartels everywhere, in the fuel sector, in command agriculture, in the US dollar, in black market exchanges, in the commodity sector, platinum, gold, and so forth. So it's frightening that our traditional fight for democracy must actually now be re-engineered to focus on how we can actually break these cartels that have become a major threat of our democracy. What is the role of the international community? What is the role of the opposition? The opposition is very constrained. We are very constrained as an opposition. The Constitution gives us the right to demonstrate in terms of Section 59 of the Constitution. So it's so easy for President Nelson Chamisa to say, let's be on the streets. But we know the response. We saw the response in January of 2019. 18 people were shot, women were raped. We saw the response on the 1st of August. So we have to exercise restraint because we can't expose our people to the vagaries of an overzealous security agents. So we have to be very circumspect, very mature, very strategic. I think the international community has a role to play, particularly President Cyril Ramaphosa. Now that the election is out of the way, now that it's almost a month after the 8th of May 2019, President Ramaphosa must understand that Zimbabwe is not a foreign policy issue. That if Zimbabwe implodes, South Africa will feel it. We are in your kitchen, we are in your bedroom, for lack of a better word. So he must be in the position where President Mbeki was in 2006, 2007, understanding that a sustainable South Africa, and indeed a sustainable region, requires a solid, strong Zimbabwe. But there's another extra dimension now, which is the military coup of November 2017. The military coup was seamless. Anyone who studied the military coups will tell you that the Zimbabwean coup is a copybook for coups. And every soldier in that region will be studying that. So that means that in the region, there is now the introduction of a factor that hitherto was not there. If I was a president, I would be very worried. If I was the president of South Africa, the king of Eswatini, the president of Namibia, the president of Mozambique, the president of Angola, I would be worried about the precedent and the copybook that Zimbabwe, November 2017, represents. What does this mean? It means that there has to be a soft landing for Zimbabwe. It means that the leaders of the region must treat Zimbabwe with agents and offer the help that is required. And the help is very simple. Get Zimbabweans talking, get Emerson Mnangagwa and Nelson Chamisa talking, embark on the reform agenda, create a transitional mechanism, and hold free and fair elections that everyone will shake hands on to and will accept the same as a free reflection of the people's will, the people of Zimbabwe. That is the easy solution. The same applies to the international community. Capitals like Brussels, like London, like Washington, DC. We made this point to Minister Hippel Gowden in the morning that the UK and others have got a role in ensuring that there's a sustainable Zimbabwe that requires dialogue, that requires incisive engagement, not the kind of engagement we've seen in the past of trying to chlorinate an unsustainable position, but an engagement in respect of which hard questions are answered. Why is there no rule of law in Zimbabwe? Why is there closure of political space? Anything short of that is dishonest engagement, and it will not get Zimbabwe anywhere.
Thank you very much. Let me take the first question, which is not too long ago. Just to let you know, this was the slogan in Nigeria for young people who, frankly, I believe, felt that the space was being closed or was closed for them. And of course, when you look at our own situation in the immediate pre-independence days, all those people who were leaders, probably with one expected case, in fact, no exception, they were all under 40. Some of them even under 30 when they became national leaders. At that time, you may, whatever reason or excuse you may want to give, that was the situation. And then even in the military days, General Gawan became head of state at 33. By the age of 42, I have been head of state and I've given up and I've returned to the farm. Then, now what do you have? I don't know if we have any governor among our governors today that is under 40. I don't think so. When I became elected president, we had a governor or two that were young. One of them was Donald Duke. Before we were sworn in, I was going around the world and I took Donald to Cuba. And Fidel Castro, I introduced him to Fidel Castro. Fidel Castro said, "How old is he? He's looking young. I don't know that you now have college boys as governors." That was as young as Donald Duke looked. But even then, Donald Duke was 35. And then I threw it back at Fidel. I said, "Fidel, how old were you when you took over as a gorilla?" Then he remembered that he was only 30. Now, there are, quite honestly, a few things. And those of you who are Nigerians here and are young, there are a few things that you have to. Now, if the man who signed after young people have agitated for not too young to run, and we got a law passed, and the man who signed it is 76, and he doesn't believe that is not too old to run, then there's something wrong. And you have to decide how you will handle that which is wrong. That's number one. Number two, I always say that, look, if you think that anybody will vacate his position and say, hey, come and sit here, then again you have to see yourself. You have to make their seat a little bit uncomfortable for them. When you make, and I said this publicly in Nigeria, that if I'm sitting down and there are two of you on my left, two on my right, and you are pressing me, when I feel uncomfortable, I will either get out and let you feel the place, or I do something that will make your own position more comfortable, and or make me more comfortable than you are making me, whichever one. Now, but the truth is this: the young people are their best friends, their own best friends, or their own best enemies, with all due respect. The election that we are still not finished with, I tried to get, and there were a few young people who came out. I tried to get them together, but they wouldn't come together. We had 72 people contesting. 72. We've never had that number. When I contested and won, there were 3 political parties, and there were 2 of us contesting. 72 is ridiculous, Judge. What do you get out of it? And then trying to get the young people together. They wouldn't get together. Some of them, 1 week to the election, they pull out. Some of them, they didn't even get any vote in their own constitution. I think the not too young to run as a bill and as a law is all right, which means that the age of participating in the election has been reduced. I think initially you cannot be a governor until you are at the age of 35. I believe now it has been reduced to 30, isn't it? Well, among the governors today, when it was 35, we had one at least in my own time who was governor at the age of 35. Now that it has been reduced to 30, there's no governor under the age of 40. I don't know what the law has achieved. So when you mouth or sloganize, you must see what purpose and how do you implement. But if you think that somebody will feel that, oh yes, come and take over from me, you won't get it. Make it a little bit uncomfortable for them, then they will start finding their way back home. But you must also be ready to work together. If we are saying, in the context of Nigeria, that the under 35 years of age are about 70% of our population. Now, then why should you not be able to take over? Why? But if what you are saying to me is that I should be the one to run for you to take over, then it's not right. I won't do it. And let me be honest with you. At my age, I rather sit at home and be a little bit comfortable before I take my departure, my boarding pass, and go into So I think a lot of it is in your hand, and it depends on how you manage it. But not too young to run. It's a law. Is there? But if a law is there and it's not serving your purpose, then look at how that law can be made to serve your purpose.
Yeah, thank you, Your Excellency. Greg and Carlos, can I ask you to be very brief because we're running out of time?
Very brief, because I know you need 5 minutes to buy
Buy
a
the
book.
book. So,
One of the things I love, and you've heard it now, working with Baba, is when he comes up with phrases like when we went to go and speak to Fidel Castro. It's a bit like playing guitar with Bob Dylan. But let me just make 2 very quick comments on one on the inclusiveness of youth, management and diversity, which Carlos raised, and the other on China. The issue of inclusiveness of youth is a big issue in South Africa, and I say this as a South African co-author. We've seen steadily dwindling interest in registration and then voter turnout in our democratic elections in South Africa, and it's only been a relatively short period of time, just 25 years. So the turnout in the last election fell from a peak of over 80% 25 years ago to 65% now, and if you add the combination of people not registering together with the turnout, the ANC is essentially elected by a quarter of South Africans who are eligible to vote. And this is particularly a problem among the youth, where the registration rates are below 20% in the sort of 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old age group. And it's clearly going to be incumbent on politicians to do something about this and to mobilize people to get out and to give a different message. People have become numbed or apathetic to traditional political messaging very quickly. They feel it's not really the avenue that can get things changed, clearly. The other aspect which relates to this is in South Africa, if you gather all the votes together, on the one side of the political spectrum and gather the votes together for the opposition, on the other, you pretty much have the same percentages as you had in 1994. Almost exactly. So in other words, as a means of breaking the traditional, largely racial divides in South Africa, politics has wholly failed. It becomes a means of racial discrimination, distribution, if you were, and we haven't successfully been able to break the racial paradigm. And you could maybe say, well, what do you expect after just 25 years? But it is a disappointing outcome, given the relative maturity of the South African economy and social system. Let me just make one quick comment on China. Christina, to have successful conflict mediation or resolution, you need, as Tendai's pointed out, to have 3 critical ingredients. One is that the parties who are engaged in conflict or tussling see greater advantage in settlement than they do from continuing conflict. So there's more to be gained by ending the fighting or arguing. The second is you need leadership and timing and methodology. But the third crucial factor is you need all the parties being pushed to the negotiating table or towards settlement equally by the international community and by the regional community. And I'm afraid it is exceptional that we have this rather than we don't have it. In South Africa, we largely had those conditions between 1990 and 1994, which explains why in a relatively short period of time we had the outcome we had. Of course, there was tremendous leadership and timing in this, but we had this equal pressure on all the parties to settle. And if you have the EU doing one thing, or the United Kingdom, within or without the EU, doing another, and the Americans doing something different, and in particular the new player, which is Robin's question, in China, doing a completely different thing, it's very hard to see how you're going to arrive at any sort of form of settlement. And the Chinese, well, while it's a great news story on African economies over the last 25 years, it's not a great news story on African governance, not universally. So much has been done through the changing trade and investment relationship. But in terms of having an equal relationship when it comes to governance with other international partners, the Chinese often offer a way out of some of the traditional binds and governance complexities that exist. So bringing the Chinese on board, or getting, to use Carlos's terminology, on board the Chinese wagon, whichever way you want to do this, is going to be a key part of aligning external interests. That's not going to be very easy to achieve. But if you don't do it, you're going to be at loggerheads rather than a partnership.
Okay, thank you very much, Greg. And Carlos has ceded the floor because we've run out of time. I wish you would all come to Rusi because we don't normally have this many people who want to speak at an event. So I'd like to invite all of you to Rusi for our next event. But let me, so huge apologies to all of you who didn't get to ask a question. I'm hoping that our speakers will be around a bit so you can come and privately ask them for a question. Can I extend an enormous thanks to the three disruptors on the panel, and of course to Professor Lopes for your wonderful term for them. Can I thank Alex and Chatham House and all of you for a really amazing job pulling this event together. And then thank all of you in the audience. So please join me in thanking our speakers.
Chisa, Zimbabwe Chisa. Ezoko. Pamsoroi. Zvakutenda chair. Ni first ni nomination yamakandipa kuno ku UK. Zvakutenda zvakare ni nomination yakamaka pa President Chamisa. Only 13 out of 13 nominations. I think it's a privilege to be here talking to fellow Zimbabweans in the diaspora community. All of you know that the country is burning. All of you know that Emerson has failed. All of you know that we are being run by the worst government in the history of government. All of you know the suffering that your relatives are going through back at home. 79% of our people are living below the poverty datum line, surviving on less than 35 cents a day. There is no electricity, there is no water, there are no drugs in hospitals, we can't get money from the banks. Life, just ordinary life of an ordinary Zimbabwean is difficult. It can't go on like this. It can't go on like this. And as President Chamisa has said, we can't get to 2019 December. Otherwise, we'll be cannibalizing each other. Yeah, so it's not good enough. It's not good enough. You saw our Congress resolutions. We're very clear. President Chamisa is very clear that we need dialogue. We need to drag ZANU-PF screaming and screeching on the negotiating table. Dialogue is the only thing that will create a soft landing for Zimbabwe. If we don't have a soft landing for Zimbabwe, it means there's another military coup. If we don't create a soft landing for Zimbabwe, it means people will die on the streets. But the Congress resolution is also very clear that the people of Zimbabwe have got the right to demonstrate, a right to petition, a right to confront peacefully and constitutionally. That right is codified in Section 59 of the Constitution of Zimbabwe. So we're giving Emerson Mnangagwa time. We're giving him warning. We're giving him notice. Please, let's talk. Because there will be a time when we are no longer talking. There's a time that we'll be confronting on the streets because the Constitution allows us to do so. But we don't want loss of blood. Zimbabwe has been losing blood since 1890. Some would argue that Zimbabwe has been losing blood since 1450, since 1500, Wondema rose. So it's a country that has shed too much blood. So to avoid blood, let's dialogue, let's talk, let's break bread. The message I have from President Chamisa is very simple. You are Zimbabweans, diaspora, Zimbabweans. The right to vote should be given to people in the diaspora. Americans vote vote in the diaspora. British vote in the diaspora.
Yes.
South Africans vote in the
He's
diaspora.
waiting for
Mozambicans vote in the diaspora. Senegalese vote in the diaspora. Why can't Zimbabwe do it as well? We have to vote in the diaspora. But as members of the MDC, we also ask you to support your party, to give us subscriptions, to help us, because we're a poor party. No one is supporting us. And when you give us resources, you also make us more accountable to you. Because as the British said, no representation without taxation. So when we tax you, you make us more accountable. We also expect to see more leaders of you. Next time when we have a Congress, I expect the Vice President to come from the UK. Come and take my position. Also look after your families. Look after your families, build your lives. Look after your families, because at the end of the day, it's just about how well we are governed. We won't be in politics if ZANU-PF run us well. It's going to be a long journey, but I hope we all want it to be. The MDC turns 20 this year. Mwana 20 Mwana 20 university. So atone mzukuru. So it's time to finish this struggle. It's time to make sure that Advocate Nelson Chamisa is a state house. I thank you so much. Thank you. Next time a picture.